Russia is in, again, a truly disastrous situation at this point in time. That Ukraine has been incomparably better than Russia in recruiting, training, equipping, organizing, and employing additional forces, while Russia has been struggling to do just that, literally running out of soldiers, ammunition, tanks, fighting vehicles, and so forth. The Ukraine supported superbly by the U.S. and NATO, whereas Russia, even if it declared mobilization, could not reverse this fundamental reality. So the implications are stark. They're very, very clear. Ukraine will, over time, and yes, tough fighting, more casualties, more punishing Russian strikes on civilian infrastructure, but Ukraine will, over time, I think, retake the territory that Russia has seized since 24 February. And it's even conceivable now that they could retake Crimea and the Donbass. And oh, by the way, along with what's going on in the front lines, there is insurgent activity now picking up in the Russian rear areas carried out by Ukrainians there as well. So again, this is going to take time. There will be tough fighting, all of that. But this is a disastrous situation for Russia now. And I'm not sure that everyone recognizes just how this is worse than Afghanistan. Remember, they left Afghanistan and the government they left behind stayed in power for 2 years. This is going to be a terrible, painful retreat for them. And again, the outcome just is, I don't think, in doubt anymore. Ukraine will prevail unless there's some unforeseen development. And as long as we continue to provide the weapons, and of course, you noted the latest announcement about that, I'm confident we will continue to do everything that they need to help them build on the momentum that they have now achieved and carry this all the way through to victory, frankly. Well, he still clearly has a very, very solid grip on power in Russia, but this does obviously call that into question somewhat. And somewhere there are going to be individuals who are going to be raising serious questions. There have been officials, of course, from St. Petersburg that suggested he should resign. They ended up in jail, but there were others from St. Petersburg and Moscow. So again, he's in a precarious situation, I think, although it's so difficult to predict when someone who has been an autocrat, obviously, what is that moment that pushes them off the throne? And of course, he's a kleptocrat on top of everything else, and everyone is empowered by him. So, but what he has done to his country, again, as I think we mentioned before, he set out to make Russia great again. What he's really done is make NATO great again. And by the way, this changes the dynamic, I think, with respect to European and U.S. reluctance to say that Ukraine should be able to join NATO. Given what Russia has done, there has to be a security guarantee at the end of this. The only credible guarantee is NATO membership. And we can then say, look, you brought this on yourself. We were very sensitive to your feelings before. We did not want to needlessly provoke you. You have needlessly an unprovoked invasion of your neighbor. And this is the price that you're going to pay as a result of that. Well, again, full mobilization is too late. And beyond that, they've stripped their training base. They don't have the replacement vehicles. The export sanctions on microchips to Russia have crushed their industrial base and so forth. So that's too late. The consideration of tactical nuclear weapons, yes, you could have a tactically very disastrous situation, but it doesn't change the fundamental realities, which are that Russia just cannot generate the forces, much less employ them capably and competently. Their morale is rock bottom. They're not even sure what they're fighting for other than a paycheck or perhaps to stay out of jail. The morale on the Ukrainian side is sky high. They're winning. So the question at first is, can the Russians find new defensive lines, or do they have to fall all the way back in the east, for example, to the original lines of the Donbass, where there are very considerable, almost World War I like defenses? And then how do they hang on in these other locations? Yes, they'll find places where there are urban settings that they can use effectively and fight hard. Again, there will be tough fighting, tough casualties, a lot more damage. But Russia is in, again, a truly disastrous situation at this point in time. And crossing the nuclear threshold would be so profound, and the benefit of that, quote, benefit would not be as profound. So I think, again, he's in a very difficult position. What he's going to do now is try to change the narrative and blame others and all the rest of this and find some way to explain why the special operation has failed. He would, if he used nuclear weapons, a deeper hole for himself than that in which he is currently finding himself. He's in a terrible position. Essentially, over the past 8 months, Ukraine has built a bigger and more capable army on its soil than Russia has there, and there's really nothing that Putin can do about this. The referendum at gunpoint was just not relevant. The annexation has been meaningless. The martial law that he's now declared will be similarly meaningless, and the partial mobilization has reportedly prompted more Russian men to leave the country than to go to the conscription stations. And those that have shown up or have been dragooned by the conscription offices are not exactly fit, well-trained, and they won't be well-equipped either. So they're the definition of cannon fodder. The reality is that Russia has lost in 8 months more than 3 times what it lost in 9 tough years in Afghanistan. So it's in a very difficult situation. Everything that Russia has done since 2014 has been awfully dangerous. The unprovoked and literally barbaric at this point invasion of Ukraine and the operations there have been really catastrophic for Russia as well as for Ukraine. And now Russia finds itself where it's losing on the battlefield, and the only capability it has left is that which they can use to punish Ukraine. Missiles, rockets, some bombs, and of course now swarms of Iranian-provided drones that they've been using to target Ukraine's electrical generation and distribution capacity, and have taken out about 30% of that. Now the Ukrainians are incredibly resourceful, determined, and capable of restoring this capacity over time. But again, this is also obviously a clear violation of the Geneva Convention, the law of land warfare. This is civilian infrastructure. This is not military forces that they're targeting. And they're doing it just because this is all that Putin has left at this point in time, recognizing, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that the use of nuclear weapons would cross a threshold that would be so significant that he would end up in a worse situation than he was before he used them. But again, that is something we have to take very seriously. Well, the tide that matters most is on the battlefield, and that tide is ebbing for Russia. The Ukrainians are continuing to take back, to liberate parts of their country that were seized by Russia since 24 February, having already done so. First of all, of course, defeating the Russians in the battles of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy in the north, then liberating all of Kharkiv Oblast or province, now making inroads in Luhansk. At some point, you'll see further action in Donetsk in the south. And of course, they continue to creep forward in Kherson Oblast to liberate all of that territory, which is west of the Dnipro River, still occupied by the Russians, whose logistics and headquarters have been pushed back some 70 miles from the front lines, or 70 kilometers from the front lines, because of the very accurate rockets that the U.S. has provided for the HIMARS, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, the multiple launch rocket system that is a wheel-based. And that has been so devastating to Russian headquarters, barracks, fuel depots, ammo storage sites, and other locations that it has degraded what were already inadequate logistics and command and control even farther. So the Russians are in a desperate situation where it matters most, and that is on the battlefield. So Russia has had a very, very tough time. And meanwhile, Ukraine has done